Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam, Hilchos Avodas Hakipurim, Perek Gimel Halacha Zayin. The Rambam discusses the Shliach who sent to take the Sa'il Azazel through the Midbar. And the Rambam explains that there were sukkahs, there were booths that were set up from Yerushalayim to the desert. And each sukkah had people situated there to escort him to the next sukkah. And then the Rambam adds that al kol sukkah v'sukkah emrim lei harei mazin v'harei mayim. Each sukkah that he would go through, the people would tell him there's food and there's drink. Im koshel keichei v'tzarech lechel eichel. If he gets weak and he has to eat, he could eat. However, the Rambam adds, it never happened that anyone should need to eat. None of the shluchim lazazel felt the need to eat. This Rambam is based on the Gemara in Yuma, the Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. However, there are two interpretations of that Gemara. One interpretation is that if he really does feel weak, and it's not life-threatening, he wouldn't be allowed to eat. Then why would they tell him that he could eat? So that when a person knows that he has pas basala, he has bread in his basket, the Gemara's expression, then he doesn't feel hungry. So it was a way to assuage his hunger. But if he really got hungry and his life was not in danger, many Rishonim say that he's not allowed to eat. The Rambam clearly does not agree with that, because the Rambam adds the few words that after they tell him here's food and here's drink, im koshel keichei, if he gets weak, and he has to eat eichel, he's allowed to eat. True, it never happened, but the Rambam makes it clear that if he has to eat, he could eat. And if it's pikuach nefesh, then it's obvious. The Rambam doesn't have to tell us that. Obviously, if a person's life is in danger, he's allowed to eat. Based on this interpretation of the Rambam, the Shagasari in the Sefer Gvura Sari asks a very strong question. A question from the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara there tries to make a kal v'chomer from Inui, the law of affliction, to the law of Isser Malacha, about the penalty of Karas. Inui is a prohibition that doesn't apply to Shabbos and Yom Tov, only applies to Yom Kippur. So it has a certain weakness or leniency. And yet the Torah says if you violate Inui, you eat on Yom Kippur, it's Karas. How much more so the prohibition of Malacha, which is something that applies across the board to every Shabbos and every Yom Tov, so it's a little bit or a lot more stringent, you would think. Certainly, there's a penalty of karas. And then the Gemara refutes that kal v'chomer. It says, no, you can't make that kal v'chomer because, on the contrary, Inui is stronger than the Isser Malacha. Why? Because Inui is loy hutam miklola. It's never permitted. There's no license ever in Yom Kippur that tells you you're allowed to eat. Masha'en kein Malacha, that is permissible on Yom Kippur. When it comes to the offering of the sacrifices, they would do Malacha. So you see that the Torah weakens the prohibition of Malacha on Yom Kippur. Maybe there the penalty would not be Karas. So the Gemara makes it very clear that there's a difference between Malacha and Inui. Inui is never permitted. There's never a case where you're allowed to violate Inui, except, of course, Pikuach Nefesh, which doesn't apply. But didn't we just learn, the way the Rambam learns the Gemara, that in fact, if the Shliach feels a need to eat, he's weak, he's allowed to eat? So it is Hutam Maklalai. So I'd like to provide the following answer. It's based on a long discussion, but I'm just going to give you the gist of it. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodas Hakipurim is mechadish something. He says something that's very interesting. After he goes through the prohibition of malacha on Yom Kippur, he then says in Perek Aleph Halacha Daled, mitzvahs asay acheres yesh b'Yom Kippurim, v'hi lishbas b'im achil u'shtiya. There's another prohibition, and it's to be shavus, to rest from eating and drinking. And he brings the pasuk Tanrus Nafsheseichem. In other words, what the Rambam is saying over here, that in Yom Kippur there are two parallel prohibitions. They go under the same rubric of shavis, of resting. You're supposed to rest from malacha, the way we do on Shabbos. In addition to that, Yom Kippur has an additional prohibition of shvisa, a requirement of shvisa, to rest from eating, which is described in the Torah as affliction, but it's based on the concept of shvisa. The Rambam has sources that it's based on. We won't go into that now. What does that have to do with our question? The Gemara in Menachos, the Fayin Beis, talks about how you're allowed to bring the murim, the offering, the burning of the fat of the sacrifice, on Shabbos, even though it could be done mitzari Shabbos. So the Gemara uses the argument, shekvar dachscha shchita es Shabbos. When you brought the animal, the sacrifice, on Shabbos itself, which is the day of the sacrifice, you're allowed to shecht it, which is one of the 39 malachas. So since the Torah already told you that at the beginning of the process of the sacrifice, you're allowed to do it on Shabbos, then therefore the end of the process, the Haktaras Yimurim, you could also do it on Shabbos. So you see that when there's the connection between two parts of a sacrifice, and if the first part overrides the Shabbos, so does the last part override the Shabbos. Based on that, we could say the following. What is the reason why the Shliach for the Azazel is allowed to eat if he feels weak? True, it never happened, but theoretically, if it would have happened, he would be allowed to eat. It's not because there's a leniency in the law of Inui. No, it's because the Shliach who brings the Sar Lazazer is allowed to violate the Shabbos and Yom Kippur. It's because there's a leniency in the whole prohibition of malacha, of shvisa. And therefore, this is a continuation of that. Therefore, just like there's a leniency in the shvisa, there's a leniency in the inui. But that's not because there's a leniency in inui unto itself. It's only because, in this case, he's allowed to do malacha even. And once it's connected to malacha, it has the same status, that it overrides Yom Kippur. So in fact, there is no leniency for Inui on Yom Kippur. There's a leniency when Inui is connected to a Heter of doing Malacha. So it's really a Heter in Malacha that allows you to not fast, not a Heter in Inui.